hear me? If you can hear me, please type into the Q&A text box. Wonderful, I see some yeses coming in. Well, this is a great time to start then. My name is Nadine Verna. I'm the Director of Career Development for the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, also known as CHSS, here at Montclair State University. And we will actually be using this text box that you just used to check in throughout the webinar today, which is on resume writing. You'll use this tool to type any questions that you may have as we go through the presentation. However, I wanted you to keep in mind that I will try to review all of the information first, and then, time permitting, address all of your questions at the end. So bear with me as I go through the presentation, because who knows, some of your questions may actually get answered. But I do also want to encourage you, if there's something that's not clear or something that you'd like me to elaborate on, to be an active participant and contribute your questions so that I can definitely address them at the end of the time. So thank you for joining me today. Resume writing to me is a really important topic to address for anyone at any stage in their career, because the resume is a living document. It is always evolving as you amass different types of experiences, or even as you get insights into how to present your different qualifications in a more effective way. And so keeping that in mind, the resume is what I like to consider a marketing tool. And it should concisely highlight your experiences, your education, and your skills. Your resume essentially is the cornerstone of a job search, but it is also used for, alumni networking or networking with other professionals in your field. Sometimes you'll use it when you have informational interviews to give people an accurate sense of your background. You may also be using it to join professional committees. So it has a lot of uses. And today what we're going to really do is try to talk about how to craft a high impact resume that you can easily use for some of these different circumstances. At this time of year, we may have some students, but I know that we may also have some alumni who are just trying to make shifts. And so hopefully no matter what stage you are in, any of you will find some of the tips and recommendations that I give to you useful. So I want to review some of the most common resume sections, which you'll see highlighted here in these boxes. Notice that I didn't start off with the template here. That's because templates or resumes can take on a lot of different styles and a lot of different formats based on the objectives that the writer has. But there's certain pieces that are pretty essential to resume writing in order for you to be, effective. And so what you'll see here is that we start off with personal contact information. This is important because you want people to be able to reach you if there are opportunities that they want to send your way. So the thing that you want to have in your personal contact information section is your full name. And this is because a lot of times there may be an application linked to a job maybe that you might be applying for, or you may have to submit documents along with your resume and your application, or copies of your documents. And if you have a preferred name, then you want folks to be able to link your materials and put them all in the same file. So you definitely want to put your full name, but if you do have a preferred name, you can definitely put it in parentheses. Like say, for example, if you go, by Chuck and your name is Charles, you can put Charles Chuck in parentheses and then your last name, or in quotations. And that will give the reader an indication that, you have a preferred name. Sometimes this works for, international students who may have, variations of their names, and they want to make sure that, all of the information is shared with the reader. You also want to put your phone number, the best way that they can actually reach you. So for a lot of people these days, it is a cell phone number, and then an email address, as well as a mailing address. Sometimes there's some debates about whether or not you should put a mailing address on your resume anymore. And this is an area that, is debatable. However, in the most conservative advice that you'll find, it is, recommended. The next section is the education section. So usually you'll find this on almost any resume. You want to list the institutions that you've attended in reverse chronological order, and the most recent will usually top the list. You also want to list any academic distinction, study abroad, maybe theses, or related coursework as well. Essentially, what this section is doing is helping you highlight not just the education that you obtained or the degree that you obtained, but also, some of the other elements that went into your educational experience that made it enriching and also broadened your perspective and your experience. The next section is the experience section. So this could be professional experience. Sometimes people like to qualify their experiences and kind of add another word to it. You can have a broad section such as experience, or it could say professional experience, or if say you don't have a lot of work experience, maybe you want to highlight your leadership experience or your volunteer experience instead. But essentially what this section is going to do for you is let people know what you know how to do. And it's less important the type of experience and more the way that you try to add value in that setting. So you can talk about work achievements and try to talk about the things that are most relevant and transferable to the position that you're seeking. A common misconception is that, some experiences are more important than others. And while sometimes the length of time that you contribute to experience can really give you, vast, like different types of opportunities to learn and grow, what's really important is that even if it was a volunteer experience or a leadership experience in a club, that you do your best in highlighting the way that you contributed and the accomplishments that you had in that position. We'll definitely talk about that a little bit more in the presentation. And the last most common section you'll find is skills. In this area, you're going to talk about some of the measurable skill sets that you might have, such as languages, technology assessments, or other types of competencies. And you want to use this time to not just shine, but also you want to be clear and very honest about, some of the experiences that you have. So at any point, maybe if you're called for an interview, you could actually be tested on some of these skill sets. And so you want to make sure that, you're very clear and honest about what these skill sets are. But this is a great section for you to highlight some things that are particular to your skill set and your knowledge base that maybe another applicant may not have. So resume will often have additional sections, and because it is specific to the individual, the resume really can vary from person to person in terms of what these additional sections look like. We talked about even the use of different types of language. And so even just in that, how people labeled some of their sections could be different. But, in order of just broad categories, we have volunteer and leadership experience are some other sections that we might see. These might talk about some of the meaningful work I just talked about that are done in a voluntary or leadership capacity, maybe in a school club. It can also be in a civic organization or even a sorority or fraternity or a professional organization as well. We also will see that people will list their memberships and affiliations. So while this could involve listing a professional or trade group, the difference between the memberships and then the volunteer and leadership section is just that, you know, memberships and affiliation would be more of like a list, stating the organizations that you belong to, and oftentimes the length of time that you belong to that organization, whereas the volunteer leadership experience would specify maybe some of the leadership roles or committees that you belong to within that or other organizations. Sometimes you'll also see people use additional information as a section where that can include things like memberships. It could also include licenses and certifications. It could include volunteer and leadership experience or skills. So some of the other sections that we mentioned above, but the difference is that additional information can be useful when you don't have a lot of any one of those particular categories. So say if you just had one volunteer experience, or you have one license, or you know, you did one leadership thing, you could kind of put it in there as kind of like a hodgepodge of different things if you want to maximize your space for other things in the resume. So that brings me to the next point, which is just that there are some kind of formatting and content related guidelines that you're recommended to follow when you're writing a resume. And we have them generalized here on this sheet. It's really just important that you try to keep your resume, in most cases, to one page. 2 or more pages is acceptable in some certain circumstances. So for example, if you are applying for federal jobs, there is a federal resume format that oftentimes many of the federal agencies may even have guides, resume guides for writing their style of resumes on their webpage. And so those resumes usually are more than one page. If you are in grad school and you have a lot of prior experience, then in certain sectors that you may be applying for, like maybe education, then 2 pages may be acceptable. So it's really important that you understand the types of roles that you're going for and the industries or sectors that they're housed in, so that you don't make any unnecessary errors. But that can really guide you as to whether or not you can go above the 1 page standard. If you have any questions, then I would say err on the side of caution and go with 1 page. You will never go wrong with 1 page. So that's kind of the gold seal for writing a resume. Usually you want it to be on 8.5 by 11 watermarked paper if you're gonna be handing it to somebody. This is kind of like icing on the cake. If you're going to a career fair and you don't have watermarked paper, bring the resumes that you have and work with that. But if you are able to get resume paper from Staples or another stationery store, then that could show just another nice added touch. If you do use watermarked paper, however, just make sure that it's the watermark is in the right direction when you print it out at the printer. I tend to recommend for font style that you go with Times New Roman or other serif fonts. And these are, you'll see that there's a difference between Times New Roman and Arial. So Times New Roman tends to have the little squigglies at the end, and those are what we call serif fonts. I tend to recommend that just because sometimes with the sans serif fonts, you know, when you're printing or, you know, say the reader's been going through a lot of resumes, there are some letters that look the same. So for example, a capital I looks the same as a lowercase l when you're using a font like Arial. So a name like Alana might be confusing to the reader. And there are just more distinctions in a Times New Roman. But you don't think that, you know, this is not something that will, you know, make or break you, but it's just something to help the reader move along a little bit quicker when reviewing your document. The recommended font size is 12. You can go as low as 10, but I wouldn't recommend below that. And then no less than half-inch margins on each side. Be careful also when you're putting your address, like in your contact information section, you want to highlight the city and state or the city and country whenever you're indicating your address. And then you also want to continue to do that for the locations on your in your experience section. So pretty much when you're writing your and you're putting down your experience, you want it to have several different pieces, and location is one of them. So this speaks to that. We'll definitely talk about that more as well. When you're using your email address, I recommend using your Montclair email address or something else professional. So if you're using, Yahoo or Gmail, it's recommended that you try to use maybe your name in your email address. It's just another way to make yourself more memorable and to align all of the pieces together. But if you don't have an email address that uses your name, just make sure that it's professional. So something like partygirl@yahoo.com would not be considered professional. And so you want to be very thoughtful about, the email account that you use. For education and experience, you're going to use reverse chronological order. So we already talked about that as it relates to education, but this is also true for experience. You're going to start with the present experiences first, and then that's followed by the most recent to the oldest. And then as you start to refine your resume, as you move forward in life and career, a lot of times people will shave from the bottom, the older experiences or the ones that are least relevant. But you always start with what you're doing now or what you most recently did, and then work to the bottom. And then I would say for education as well, we usually don't recommend that you put your high school experience, especially if you're beyond sophomore year in college. Just because hopefully by that point you will have some new experiences that you can add, and you have to rely less on your high school experiences. So let's talk a little bit about bullet points. Every resume should talk about the experiences that you've had, the specific experiences that have prepared you for the role or the opportunity that you're seeking. All of these should begin with an action verb, and that I recommend that they be no longer than 2 lines long. So these are just some general formatting recommendations. And then we have some other things that I recommend just because I think there are great things that can be done to help you promote yourself a little bit more. So I would recommend that you avoid using online document templates for the most flexibility. We have a few samples on Hire a Red Hawk. So those of you who have access to the document library there can see that there are several different samples that you can use. The difference is that those are created in Microsoft Word. They're easy to manipulate versus the online templates that may be restricted in terms of how you can manipulate the formatting or move information around. I have found in my experience that they don't tend to maximize space in the best way. And so it leaves, little room for you to add things and, when you need to, or it limits the space, or there's a lot of white space. It's just really inflexible once you get to a certain point in terms of the types of experiences that you want to add. So I would say just stay away from them. And if you don't like the samples that we have on Hire a Red Hawk, you can always just, there's all kinds of formatting, webinar kind of information online about like how to use Microsoft Word to the best of your ability so that you can learn how to, put your information the best way you want to do it. And so I recommend that it's, this is going to be a great time for you to just learn for yourself how to use some of the tools in Word to design your own resume so that you can always have control over how to put the information and how much that you can put in a reasonable amount of space. And then keeping that in mind, you want the resume to be concise and lean. I mean, you really only have about 1 page. So, you know, you want to take the things that are the most important, that if it, you know, it really comes down to it and you're getting that, you know, 30 to 60-second scan, you know, so that you know, HR rep or hiring manager decides if they want to look a little bit further into your application. You want to put in the things that you think would most convince them that you're the person for that opportunity. And this also goes for if you're applying to grad school as well. Like, what are the most important things that they should know about you? Really focus on that instead of trying to put everything you've done since 8th grade. You want to have consistent formatting throughout the document. So if you always have your job title italicized, you know, then it should be throughout. Like, so if you start off with the first job and you have it in italics, then it should continue throughout. For every other job, you should have the job title italicized. And so you want to help train the reader to start with, if there's certain information that's most important to them that they're looking for, that once they read that first listing, that they know how to find it for all of the future listings that you have on the page. And the next bullet point goes along with what I just said about trying to avoid the online templates. Avoid bright colors and fancy designs. You really don't want to distract the reader. You want them to focus on the content of the resume and really what you have to offer above what colors or, you know, what pictures or, you know, icons are on the document. This can vary, again, based on the type of field that you're pursuing. So if you're going into a creative field like graphic design, then the resumes for those kinds of opportunities can look vastly different than if you're trying to go for something like corporate HR or nonprofit management. So it's really important that not only you know about yourself and what you have to offer, but you also know about the industry or the opportunity that you're seeking and what would be acceptable to them. Sell yourself. Again, remember, this is a marketing tool. So this is not the time to be modest. If you have a great GPA, and we usually say, you know, 3.0 above is a great place to be, then share that, you know, and if you don't, then that's fine. Look for other things to share about yourself. This could be that you got a scholarship, or that you have, you know, we talked about leadership roles earlier, and those are other great things to just share about. Especially if you were appointed or elected, those are things that you could share to really just show how not only is your experience based on your, or the experience that you're presenting based on your perception of yourself, but there are other people who have confidence in you as well. Avoid sensitive or inappropriate activities. Again, this is all about being relevant. So if you are applying for, you know, something that's political, then maybe you will want to talk about some of your political activities to show that demonstrated interest. However, because politics can be very polarizing, if you're not applying for something that's in the political landscape, maybe that's something you decide to keep off because you don't know who's going to be reading your resume. And you want to, again, avoid some of the distractions that could exist. You also want to avoid overly descriptive and vague statements. Be really clear about what it is you're trying to convey and try to make it so that it can be understood by even someone who's not directly in that field. That doesn't mean that you can't use language that's, you know, widely known or refer to techniques or technologies that are used in that industry that would show that you're qualified. It means just that you want to make sure that, you know, the concise and clear part would allow, just even if it's an HR person who doesn't have your level of expertise in an area, that they can understand it and move it along to, you know, the line manager who may be the one making the final decisions. I recommend that you leave periods off at the end of bullets, but this is definitely not a requirement. A lot of people use them, but the reason I say that is just that it's just one more thing to track. And a resume, the bullets are actually statements or phrases. They're not full sentences, so you don't have to use these periods if you don't want to. So, you know, you can definitely save yourself the trouble. We talked a little bit about terminology and language used for your area of interest. You know, just use them wisely. And also use your space wisely, you know, so you only have one page in most cases. So maximize that space with the things that count the most and try to avoid white space, a lot of white space, but know that it's a balance. You don't want the resume to be too intimidating. And because you often spend a lot of time writing a resume and you become very familiar with it over time, you know, you definitely want to proofread. You can use even software like Grammarly to help you with spell check or grammar if you want. But I always also recommend a second pair of eyes. That's where professionals like the career services advisors come in, you know, handy. Or, you know, you can also take things to the writing center as well. Or even if you don't have time to do that, you know, ask a roommate, ask, you know, a loved one to take a quick look at what you have put together before you send it out, because sometimes the time that you spend on it can also keep you from seeing some things that should be changed. So now we get to look at what a resume could look like. And this is an example of one of the templates that we use, or the samples that we use. And again, this is in the document library in Hire Red Hawk. It is formatted in Microsoft Word. So it is something that you can manipulate if you don't like certain parts of it, but you like others. It just is a way for you to give students a start on, you know, kind of getting a document out, especially if they need to in a short period of time. And again, not all resumes have to look like this, but we think that there's some great elements here. So notice that at the top, you know, we have, you know, all of the contact information, you know, how you would list it. We have all of the, like the address and the phone number and the email going across. In this example, the person did have a LinkedIn page also linked onto it so that the reader can see more information. And I think that's one of the great things about LinkedIn, is that it allows you to list additional information that would not fit on a resume. Notice that we didn't talk about summaries or objectives. I know this was touched upon for those of you who attended the job searching webinar last week. For most of the students that I work with, it may not be the best use of space, because a lot of times people are trying to get their foot in the door. They're not that specific about, like an objective would speak to a specific type of role in a specific type of industry, and maybe they don't have those parameters in their search. A summary usually tries to encompass a body of experience and summarize it for the reader at the beginning. And so if students don't have a lot of experience, then we may not suggest a summary. So, you know, there are definitely other tools that you can use to make your resume more robust and representative of what you have to offer. But those two sections we left out in this sample because we know that a lot of times we're working with students here on campus and they may not be the most appropriate to use for their circumstances. But, you know, if you're an alum and you wanted to have another conversation about that, we certainly can. But you'll notice here that we have the education listed as well. We have experience. And on the top is a present experience. And notice in that case, the verb that we start with is in present tense. But then when we move down to past tense experiences, we'll have that start month and year to that end month and year. And then all of a sudden, these bullet points are now led with action verbs in the past tense. So that's also something to keep in mind, that your verbs should be in alignment with the dates that you have for the different types of jobs as well. So hopefully this is helpful, but again, this is a document that you can access on the document library. I just talked a little bit about bullet points, and I really want to dig in a little bit more because I do feel like this is the meat of the resume. So when you're trying to write high impact bullets, you want to know the desired skills of the job or opportunity that you're seeking. So read job postings. Oftentimes these are great sources of information for this. And then you want to respond to what they're asking for and determine what the message is that you're trying to send to them. So is it that you're innovative? Is it that you're resourceful or collaborative? You know, so you want to respond to what those most desired skills are. And by determining what you have to offer, then you can put together these bullets that will reflect more of an accomplishment over the responsibility. So the responsibilities tend to be what they asked you to do at a job. The accomplishment is how well you did what you were asked to do. So it's talking about how you excelled in the given tasks. You want to, because you have limited space, you want to list your bullets such that the most important or most impressive accomplishment statements are first. So even if you did something for 6 months out of a 5-year experience, but you felt like that was the pinnacle of your experience there, then that might be something that you'll list on top to catch the reader's attention. You also want to highlight the impact of your work. So whenever possible, quantify or qualify your results. So how many people did you serve? And you'll see that we move down to this last bullet. So we're going to try to avoid too technical language and jargon, but in order to kind of really flesh out all of the important details, ask yourself, who did I work with? What was the purpose? Where were we doing this work? Why? For whom? How many people did we serve? So that goes back to the bullet that talks about quantifying and qualifying results. These questions that kind of go back to grade school when you were learning about parts of speech, they've popped up again at this time in your life to help you really think about how to get the information out that you need to really talk about the value that you added or the accomplishments that you had for each job. And all of that hopefully will allow you to catch the reader's attention in 5 seconds. Now, I often find that sometimes people think like, oh, especially if I'm in CHSS and I'm in the liberal arts, what do I have to offer? I'm not sure what my skills are. I'm not sure what my accomplishments are. And I definitely want to kind of draw your attention to, there's different kinds of books on this topic, which you'll see some of the covers of. We also do assessments in Focus 2 that will bring you back to, or kind of reveal some of the skill sets and values that you have that you could use to enhance your resume. And then also you can use things like, what can I do with this major, to link some of the things that you've learned with things that you could possibly do. But just kind of like as a little bit of a list of some of the things that I captured from these resources in terms of skill sets that you have, or capacities and learning that you've amassed, you'll see this list right here. So hopefully that will give you a boost of, brainstorming, some of the things that you could highlight in, your resume. So if writing is a skill that you developed in the classroom and you find that on the job, you keep getting asked to edit things or review things, then that may be something that you should highlight, you know, and maybe that could be related to the kinds of opportunities that you seek. So hopefully that's helpful. But let's talk a little bit more about the bullet points. They're not often easy to write. And we do have some sample bullet points in the document library, but I do want to draw your attention to a formula called SAR, which stands for Situation, Action, Result. In interviewing, you'll sometimes see SAR again, or it's sometimes presented as STAR, which would be Situation, Task, Action, Result. It all kind of draws to the same thing. But what it helps you do is talk about the experience that you had or the accomplishment that you had. And using this formula, pretty much what you'd be trying to do is flesh out what you accomplished by talking about, I accomplished X by doing Y as measured by Z. So using this formula, it can kind of keep you on track and keep your bullet points concise, but also allowing you to have the most important information. And this is, you know, a way that it can kind of manifest. So you want to use your accomplishment statements to describe the situation, the action taken, and the results achieved. When you're describing the situation, you want to talk about maybe the nature of the problem or the goal you sought to accomplish. And that allows you to provide context for the accomplishment. In terms of the action, you might talk about the opportunity, so that you provide a brief analysis of the opportunity. And this could look something like, let a 9-member peer group charged with improving. So the charged with improving piece kind of relates back to, you know, the kind of leadership that you would provide in that context. You want to use strong action verbs. We've talked about those. And some examples are delivered, managed, created, participated. Created, participated in, or worked on are less effective, I think, because they don't speak directly to a skill set that you might have. So maybe managed, for example, now we know you have managerial skills or organizational skills, or created lets us know that you're creative. Whereas, you know, participated in may not talk about your individual contribution, or worked on, for example, may not let us know exactly what you did in terms of working on a project. So we want to kind of get as specific as we can. And you want to draw distinctions between what you did as an individual versus in a group. So keep all that in mind. And then in terms of results achieved, you want to talk about the impact that you may have on organizations or on clients. So an example is you double the number of clients served. If you can quantify, then definitely do that, because that can seem more tangible. So you might talk about dollars raised or the percentage of services increased. But if you can't quantify, qualifying is great as well. So you can still say that you increased collaborations between departments, even if you don't know, you know, if you can't measure how. Or you can talk about, for example, that a recommendation was adopted by senior leadership. So that still shows impact. And at the bottom, you'll see that I took a sample bullet and showed how SAR played out in that. So you'll see that it says shed underperforming programs and slash departmental expenses by 40% in 2 years by introducing an aggressive volunteerism campaign. And notice that SAR is not in order. You don't always have to have situation, action, result in that order. In this case, they talked about the situation, then the result, and then the action taken. So we know that through this bullet that there were some underperforming programs. And the action that the person took is that they started to have they introduced a volunteerism campaign. And so by getting more volunteers involved, they were able to not only, you know, shed those programs and maybe focus on things that were more effective, but they were also able to cut costs. And so this is an example of how it plays out. So in a few minutes, I'm going to take your questions, but I did want to share that there are some real ways that you can actually prepare your resume and use it to participate in certain things that are coming up. So, you know, a next step for you could be participating in our virtual career fair that's taking place next Wednesday. So you'll see that we have a great number of, I mean, there's way more organizations participating than this, but some of these logos should be very familiar to some of you. So there are some great organizations that, you know, want to engage with you and are hiring. So these could be for internships as well as jobs. So I did provide the link up there. So maybe, hopefully you were able to take a picture or, and you will get more information as well as we get closer to the date. But the link will allow you to see all of the participating employers, and more have been getting added each day. And so that list could help you prepare using some of the things that we talked about today. And don't forget to get on Hire Red Hawk, which I've mentioned several times, the document library. We not only have a resume writing guide on there, we also have a resume checklist. We have the samples that we discussed. We have some sample bullet points. So there's a whole bunch of resources that can help you as you move along in your resume writing. You can also make appointments on that. We're doing Zoom appointments now, but we are still very much accessible. You can find jobs. So we talked about using job postings to help you put together your resume. So this is a great way to find some of those listings. And then we have more webinars coming up. So you can definitely sign up for those. So now I'm gonna just take a moment to take a look at any questions you have. I think some of them have been answered, so that's good news. Someone did talk about, just make sure. Okay, I did see that the question was answered about capital letters at the beginning of each bullet. And my colleague Adam Mayer, who's also in attendance with us today, did say yes. So that's hopefully useful for everyone. If you have any other questions, then I'm gonna just hang around and I'm happy to answer them at this point. Okay, so someone said they didn't quite understand the SAR section. So I'm gonna go back. So when you're writing your bullet point, SAR can help you frame it in a way that you get all of the right pieces or the right information out to the reader. So what you want to ask yourself is what is the situation? Like what is the, what's the context of, okay, so you added, sorry, I see another follow-up question. Is it meant for goals achieved or, okay. So it's meant to help you write your bullet points or your accomplishment statements. So for every employment that you have, you're gonna, in your employment section or in your experience section, you're gonna have 5 pieces of information. So the first thing is you're gonna have the name of the employer that you worked for, the job title that you held, the location of the experience. So that would be the city and the state, which we talked about, and the dates that you had that position. So it's gonna usually be start a month and start year to either present or end month and year. And then the last piece, which I like to think is like the meat of it all, is the accomplishment statements or bullet points. And so in writing those, you want to convey what you did and how well you did it. And so what you can do is use the SAR formula to help you write those. So you want to talk about what you accomplished, what you did to accomplish that task, and how you added impact, and talk about how you measured that impact. So when we look at that example down there, the situation was that they had in the bottom of the page here, the situation was that they had underperforming programs. So that person shed underperforming programs, which is kind of a combination of situation and action, but you shared that this is the situation that they're facing, that there's an underperforming programs, and then so they shed the underperforming programs, and then they slashed department expenses, and then they did that by introducing a volunteerism campaign. So it may not always be in that order, it can change, but the SAR, what that allows you to do is ask yourself, well, what was the situation? What was the action that I took? And what was the results? And how can I convey that in a bullet point so that I really promote the most important pieces of that experience? Someone mentioned that they started with a certain organization before, and now they are with them again. How do I express those dates? With a comma in between, older dates, it's first. So there's a couple of ways that you can address that. So you could have potentially 2 different listings. I've seen that happen before. Or if your resume format, and I'll go back to the sample that we had, if your resume format is like the one that we have here, where it has a heading with the name of the employer on top, then you could put, the job title that you had most recently, and then the start month and the end year, or present if you're currently there. And then, you could have some bullet points affiliated with that. And then you could, below those bullet points affiliated with that most recent job, you could have the older job and the dates you had for that, and some of the bullet points affiliated with that older job. So they're all under that same listing. So in the case of, Montclair State University Residence Life, then you could have resident assistant that year, the dates for that, the bullet points, and then the next job, which say if it's if it's an office assistant, then that job, the dates for that, and then the bullet points. And let's see, so another person asked, if you do not have a lot of experience after high school that is related to the job you're looking into, how would you go about that when you're writing your resume? So there are definitely other things that you could do to show that you have demonstrated interest in a field. So for example, volunteer experience, leadership experience, especially if those are related to the thing that you're trying to pursue, you could definitely, put bullet points, for example, for your leadership experience, as you see we have here. So you can emphasize that a little bit more. Say, for example, if you wrote a paper, like a thesis, in an area that relates to that field, then you could put that. You could also, so we talked about volunteer, leadership. If there's some other types of experiences that you've had, such as maybe research, we didn't talk too much about that, but that is definitely a type of experience. A lot of people see that as very academic. You can list that in your experience section as well. I think someone, let me see. I think that we have another experience. I'm not sure about the question about applying for positions. So if that's a question that you want to, someone asked about applying for certain positions separately. If you're still on, then that may be a question that you can forward to chsscareer@montclair.edu. If you could be more specific, then we could definitely answer it through there. Another question is, should we be adjusting our resume for each job we apply to? You definitely want to keep in mind the types of jobs that you're applying for when you're putting a resume together. In most cases, you don't have to have a a separate resume for each individual job. But if you have a cluster of jobs that are very similar, so maybe you're applying for introductory research assistant positions, and they're like in a psych labs, then maybe you know the resume for those cluster of jobs may be very similar. But then say if you also want to apply for a marketing assistant position in a corporate environment, then that resume may be a little bit different than the research positions. We recognize that students or alumni sometimes have, you know, multiple interests. So as long as the resume that you're using is for a certain category of positions, you could probably use it for several different positions in that category. But I would definitely have you take a second look if there's something vastly different that you also want to apply for. Someone also asked, who can they send their resume to if they after they finish editing it? And that's an awesome question. We actually have on Hire Red Hawk, we have an opportunity for students to upload their documents, and they can upload their resume and have their college career advisor review it there. So in most cases, if there's CHSS students on this webinar, then they can upload it and have someone from my office take a look and give feedback. Sometimes you may get also an email that says, like, just make an appointment and we can review it or discuss it a little bit more. So that's one way. But then I would also say you can just make an appointment and upload your document to the appointment file when you do sign up. And then the counselor will know that that's something that they need to review and talk to you about. So someone talked about, how can I determine my relevancy, the relevancy of the courses? So, you know, that's actually something you probably will determine based on what you learned in the course. So you know what the syllabus is and what was covered, and then you can definitely compare that to the jobs that you're applying for and the descriptions that the employers provide, and see if, you know, if you think that a lot of the content that you covered relates to what they're asking you to do or to know for the job. The relevant courses, I wouldn't necessarily say put everything, but usually it's probably going to be higher level courses, especially electives that can be really topical. So maybe it's going to be abnormal psychology or adolescent psychology as opposed to introduction to psychology. So the things that really kind of, you know, narrow down on specific topics, I think can be most helpful in that area. So definitely make use of that. So it seems like we've answered a lot of questions and we don't have any more. So I just want to thank you guys again for your time. And let you know that, you definitely have some additional resources you can access. Please be in touch. We're happy to support you. And please join us for future webinars. Take care.